Okay. So we are recording. All right, so this module is module 3 of the small business skills. We'll be talking about negotiations tonight. A very useful skill for any entrepreneur, small business owner, or anyone that's doing business. So we'll talk about some of the different types of negotiations, some of the key things that you should be focused on doing a negotiation, like BATNA, ZOPA, reservation price, barriers to agreement. So we'll talk about some of the things you should be looking for and thinking about while you're in negotiation, while you are negotiating. We'll review some tactics and mental errors, and we'll do some activities as well. So let's first define what negotiations is. Negotiation is the means by which people deal with their differences. So they try to resolve two differences so they can agree on something, okay? So most commonly when we're negotiating, we are trying to buy or sell, but not always, right? If you've ever been married or in a serious relationship or are married and are in a serious relationship, you'll understand that oftentimes it's not just about money. You might be negotiating how much time you have or when you can work out or who's picking up the kids or what you're doing for work. So it's not necessarily just the money that you're dealing with. Let's see. So the two main types of negotiations are distributive negotiations and integrative that we will be discussing. So distributive and integrative. And we'll go over both of those. So in distributive negotiations, I have an image here of some people playing tug of war. And I don't know who they're tugging a war against, but it's this one group pulling the rope, right? This is often the push-pull type of negotiation. And in this type of negotiation, you are claiming value from the other side. Two parties compete over the distribution of a fixed sum of value. And I should say two or more parties compete, okay? The key question is, who will claim the most? So in this example, we could talk about when I was a kid and I had two brothers, right? My parents would buy a pizza and, you know, if there was, let's say, I don't know, 12 slices on there, I'm doing the math in my head because we all played soccer like crazy as a kid and we were all starving little kids. So before I even got the first slice, I was already counting the slices and figuring out who got what, and I would be eating so I can grab the next slice, right? So it's about if I take something from someone else, then they don't get it, okay? So that's what distributive negotiation is. Whereas integrative negotiation is interest-based. And so you're trying to figure out what am I interested in, what is the other party interested in, and we're trying to make each other happy. So we're looking at the interests of what people want the most and figuring out how we can do a deal that everyone can win. So it's about not only claiming value, so like the pizza example would be claiming a slice for yourself. The idea would be creating value and then claiming it. So for example, when I was a kid, I used to like to take all the toppings off and eat that. And if I didn't like bread as much, and my brother liked bread but didn't like the toppings, I could take the topping off mine and his and eat both of those, and he could eat the crust, right, and the bread, right? So it's figuring out what we're interested in and then figuring if we can trade or share so that both of us are happy. So cooperation and understanding what everyone's interest is really important in integrative negotiations. In order to achieve maximum benefits by integrating interest into an agreement. So it's about sharing information. So back to distributive negotiations, let's look at these two both a little bit more in detail. So for distributive negotiation, it's also known as zero sum or constant sum. Okay, so that means that there is a constant amount or a specific amount of goods or services or whatever the value is that you're splitting up, right? So you're trying to take as much as possible. A better definition may be win-lose, because if you split down the pizza right down the middle, or if you're in my case, you split it equally into third pieces, everyone should get 4 slices, right? If there's 12 pieces and there's 3 people and you split it equally, everyone gets 4 pieces. But if for some reason you get done with if I get done with my 4 slices first and I'm ready to go to the 5th, I have to take it from one of the other 2 people, right? So if you're not splitting it equally and you take from somebody else, then you're winning and they're losing, okay? Common examples are divorce settlements, where people are splitting up all the value and assets of the home and the marriage, and they're splitting it up, right? If you take more, then the other partner loses. A car purchase, so if you are dealing with a dealer and you decide to pay less, then they lose because they're not making as much money, right? So the question is, how do relationships factor into negotiations? If anyone wants to chat in a question, or I mean a comment there, how do relationships factor into negotiations, especially in the distributive?
I guess in terms of competition, you can look at it as sales, like who makes more sales than another, maybe.
Okay. So if you're talking about 2 car salespeople?
Correct.
Right? Okay. But what if so let's say that you're talking about specifically between the car seller and the car buyer. What information or relationship, why is that important, or how is it helpful for one or more of the parties?
What is important? The relationship or the
relationship, or having information about the other party or knowing the other party. So if I give you an example of the pizza slice, I like the cheese and toppings, and my brother likes the bread. Why is that relationship important?
But that would be an integrative, not a zero sum, right?
Right.
It's a mutually beneficial relationship.
Okay.
But then if it's a win and lose, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose.
Right.
Not in your pizza example. That's like a win-win, right? Because you get what you want and your brother gets what he wants.
Right.
But that's not distributive negotiation. That's integrative, right?
Okay. So if we have a relationship, does it change from distributive to integrative?
It all depends.
And I've got some comments here. I think you commented earlier. Is this Terry? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you want to expand?
Well, for instance, if you're going in, let's say you're going into, you've never been in a place before, and you meet someone, a stranger you'll never see again. You have a lot of different conditions when you're dealing with them because hey, I'll never see them again. The people here are watching us argue, you'll never see me again, etc. But let's say you're arguing in your own neighborhood, and it's someone you got to deal with, like your neighbor, the next day.
Right.
So suddenly, even though you might win this argument or this contest, it could compromise or empower your future contests. Maybe you win so dramatically, people don't challenge you tomorrow. Or maybe you win in a way that angers people and they challenge you because of that. So it is what it is.
You remind me of my wife makes fun of me on this story all the time. So when I was a kid, I was like in 2nd grade, and I'd never played Dungeons and Dragons before, but like I went over to my friend's house and his brother wanted us to play Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm in 2nd grade and we're playing something and I didn't know how to play it. Anyway, I found like this double-edged broadsword and I was all excited. I'm like, ooh, wow. And then my friend who's the same age as me just takes it, right? And I got so upset and I was so mad that I stormed out of the house and I ran home, and I didn't talk to him for like 5 years.
Wow.
So
And that's
like,
kid years.
well, we didn't go to the same elementary school, but yeah, you brought up that specific factor is that relationships, especially in a win-lose situation, is that when you're constantly winning and somebody's losing or vice versa, then often people get upset because you're basically taking more or you're taking more from someone else, and you're not playing to the factors of what's important with the relationship, right? So there is some, when you're dealing with win-lose negotiations, it's not necessarily playing to the benefits of all parties. Okay, so thanks, Terry, for reminding me about that. By the way, I've known this guy since kindergarten. We're still best friends today, so
Oh, good.
we joke about it too. So relationships factor in to the personal aspect of it. Information factors in to how it's important or what's important to the other party. So the more information you have of the other party, you can either use it against them. And I saw a couple of people that said like knowledge is power, and let's see what else. You can use that against them, I think. So part of that information is what motivates that other party. So when you're dealing with distributive negotiations, oftentimes you want to get as much information as possible, but you don't want to share any information because they can use it against you. So how do you achieve advantage? So typically in distributive negotiations, ways to achieve advantage is the first to offer. So you set a bargaining range. When you go onto a car dealership and you're looking at cars, you've got your party, which is you, and you got the other party, the car dealership, and the salesperson. Who makes the first offer on how much the car is worth?
The dealer?
Right, the dealer. You see it on the window, right? And so oftentimes in distributive negotiations, the first one to set the offer sets the bargaining range. And I'll share with you how that typically works. But just knowing that whenever you walk onto a dealer lot, they have managed to set the bargaining range and you're at a disadvantage, okay? Because they're making the first offer. And we'll go and do a little bit more on this in a bit. So when do you withhold information? So if you know knowledge is power, and if you know that people can use it against you, you often don't want to explain why you want the deal to happen. Other information is letting the other party know that you have options so that you can walk away. So often you don't want to tell people why you're motivated, but you want to let people know you have options. So Isaiah is asking, how do you know how much value something is? Often that's the value is between what a buyer thinks is the value of it and the seller. So it's really up to the two individuals. There's other ways you can figure out what the value is and have like a marketplace value. So if you're dealing with lots of different shoppers, you'll understand what the value is right away. So for example, if you're on eBay and you're selling like I had this Mexican peso one time that I was selling, and it was one of those gold coins. I think I sold it for like $1,000 a few years ago, right? So when people were bidding on it, it's going to get to the point where people don't bid on it anymore, and there's lots of people offering me money for this thing. So the value is determined by when people stop bidding on it. If you're dealing with just two parties and you don't have any extra information on what the value is, it's really going to be up to the two parties to figure out what that value is. There was a company, Oculus, and they made like the 3D goggles. And Facebook actually paid $3 billion to this company for this technology to make 3D goggles. And everybody thought that was a crazy amount. So this was 2014. I don't know if they've even done anything with them for Facebook. I'm not sure. But the point is, like, why would Facebook spend that much money buying this company with this technology? It's because Facebook saw some value in there. So it's sometimes the money doesn't really make sense to other parties, but it's the business finds there's some value in it that they're going to make that decision on. Okay, so how do we achieve advantage in distributive negotiations? One is to learn as much information about the other party. So when you're buying a car, right, and you're at a disadvantage because, where am I? You're at a disadvantage because right when you walk on the lot, you know that the other party, the car company, is setting the price. So how do you gain some advantage back? What are some ways that you can gain some advantage?
Negotiation.
Okay, well, you're using negotiation, but how can you use information in a car deal?
When you look at comparing other car sales.
Okay, so you could go to other lots and ask and see what they're offering for the car, right? So in a distributive negotiation, what are some ways you, in this example of you walking into a car lot and you want to buy, let's say, a new Nissan Sentra, right? What are some ways that you can get some more information about the value of that car?
You can see if there is a lot of car in the lot, you know?
Okay, you can see if there's lots of cars in a lot. That means they might not be selling. So someone says Blue Book value. So you can look up and see what the values of cars are. Compare pricing, and you go to different lots and see what, if somebody else is offering it for a lower price down the street, right? You can share that information and say, hey, other people are offering lower prices. There's also websites now where you can find out what the invoice value is for that vehicle you're looking at and what people traditionally pay for it. You can see what the reports are, consumer reports are. Do they have a good resale value? So you're getting as much information as possible. So coming prepared with information helps you in your negotiation because you now can make better decisions. The more you know about the other party, the stronger position you hold. And if you've ever been in a negotiation for a car or anything, you'll often find that the dealer is asking you lots of questions. They'll be asking you, like, when do you need it? When's your purchase decision? Who's the one that's making the decision? So they'll be asking you lots of questions, right? Is there other cars you're looking at? And so what they're trying to do is gather information as well. So these salespeople are trained on how to ask specific questions to help them figure out what you want and what the value is for you, right? And it's very similar for any negotiation. So not just cars, but yeah, if you're buying or selling houses as well. Let's see. Let's see. So achieving advantage is finding out information about the other party. The more you know, the better position you have. When you know information about the other party, it's best to start the first offer. Often it's because you can set the bargaining price, right? If you know that the other party has to make a decision today, right, price might not be as much of a factor because you know that they're urgent and they want to buy something today. One of the other tips about in distributive negotiations is don't overshoot. So if you make such an outlandish first offer, the other customer or the other party might just leave. And then you've totally lost the deal. So we'll practice some of these in a little bit. So in this cartoon, he's got the arrows in the back, right? And the quote is, next time I suggest you try win-win negotiating. So the alternative for distributive negotiation, which is the win-lose form of negotiating, integrative negotiations is traditionally called the win-win. So it's about creating and claiming value, cooperation to achieve maximum benefits by integrating interest into an agreement. This is about finding out as much as you can about the other party and figuring out if there's a way where you can create value. And so when I was originally doing the negotiation talk point, I thought about, titling the section win-win negotiating. But I find that, going into a situation isn't always about win-win. It's about figuring out what strategy you want to go into. And oftentimes you will walk into a negotiation situation, and if you go in there trying to create a win-win situation right off the bat, you might be doing yourself a disservice. Because if the other party is playing a win-lose negotiating strategy and you're trying to create value, the only way you can do that is by offering up information voluntarily. And if you go in there just spewing everything and thinking it's going to be a win-win situation, you could be giving up all your information, they could be giving up nothing, and then they've got a lot of the advantage. So I want to be careful before I get into this, is win-win situations are often better, or they can be better for both parties, but only if both parties play along. So I just wanted to give that as a caution as we go into this, that I'm not saying that one is better than the other. It's important to know the two different ones and know that if you're trying to do an integrative or win-win situation, both parties should be trying to participate to some extent. So the classic example is like the pizza. I showed the pizza toppings and the pizza bread and how we both like both and we both share it. The other one is the two kids in the orange, and the example is the dad comes into the room, the kitchen, and the two kids are fighting because they're fighting over the last orange. And the father wants to take it and just like cut it in half and give both. And so they're both upset, they're both fighting, and he can't figure out what the issue is. But the dad is smart and he took this class, so he's trying to figure out some more information. And he's like, why do you want the orange? And the one kid said, well, I want to make orange juice, right? And the other one says, oh, I need some peel in order to make some bread, right? I want to make orange zest bread. And so one person wants the peel and one wants the actual orange inside. So it's about finding out. Don't always assume that you can just split things in half. Figure out if there's a way to divide things more creatively to get people what they want. So this is especially important when you're doing business deals where there's lots of parts to it. The orange or the pizza is simple. You just split up the parts and figure out who wants what. When you're talking about business deals, there's often many different parts that are, it's easier to split up into different segments and figure out how you're going to negotiate what you want to do. So a question is, are negotiations always distributive? No, let me rephrase that. Is a negotiation always distributive, or is it always integrative? Still that question, I need to rewrite it. Is it all distributive or all integrative?
Could be a combination.
Right. So most negotiations are a little bit distributive, maybe a lot integrative, or vice versa. So it's not necessarily like it's just distributive. One person wins, just one person loses. But some people might give up a little bit of information and you make it more of a win-win situation, but still somebody feels like they're not totally winning. That's pretty common. So it's not just one or the other. So the answer is negotiation is rarely just one form or the other, but maybe a little bit of a combination. So when we negotiate, we have this dilemma. Most negotiation has opportunities for competition and cooperation, and the dilemma is the question you ask yourself: should I compete for as big a share as possible, but risk having the other side claim the value? Or should I collaborate in hopes of doing well by exchanging information? So it's a basic question of, do I share what my motivations are in this negotiation, right? And if you decide to keep quiet and just negotiate a distributive, trying to claim as much share as possible, right? You're doing this win-lose fight. You might end up losing because, they can't come up with a solution that benefits you. Whereas you give them information, you have to decide. I'm reading a question here. I'm not sure if I follow the question. As far as being one or the other, it just depends on interpretation of a party rather than the initial approach. So the initial approach it's more like, I use dating a lot as an example. Often people don't go into a dating relationship sharing everything about themselves, right? They open up slowly. And if they, get past the first few dates, they might decide to share more information, but it's usually a cautious approach. So, some people might get turned off if you share too much information right at the first date, right? At the same time, it's when you go into a negotiation, if you give up too much information, they could use it against you, or, they might be receptacle. I don't know. Maybe that's not the best example to use in this specific context. Let me know if I don't feel like I answered your question. So if you want to rephrase it, then maybe I can help. Or if somebody else understands it, maybe they can help answer it. I don't have this activity. I have another activity in just a minute. So what are some ineffective negotiations? Okay, so obviously, if we're talking about information is really important, the absence of relevant information or feedback. So what does this mean? If you're getting information that is incorrect or an absence of it, so if you're getting information about, oh yeah, this car company has a sale, right, and they're on sale, you should go in there and you can get $5,000 off, but that was, for the older car model that's no longer available, and you're going in there and trying to negotiate thinking that this information and it's wrong, then that's not going to help you in your negotiation strategy, right? So having misinformation, or if you're not perceiving the feedback correctly. So this means like, you think that somebody needs to buy something today because they're really nervous and acting like they're out of time, but they just need to pick up their kids or something, and they can come back tomorrow and do the deal. So if you're getting feedback that you think is telling you one thing, but it's not actually correct, then that could make you negotiate incorrectly. So it's about getting not only correct information, but the right amount of information. So a couple other things about ineffective negotiation. There's a term called satisficing. What it means is accept an available option as satisfactory, right? So you go to a car dealership and they only got 5 cars, and the person says, like, well, we have this orange car, and I can, you want $200 off the price. Fine, we'll give you the orange car for $200 off. And you're like, okay, I don't really like the orange car, but I'll take it, right? So you could have maybe through some more negotiation negotiated a better color that you liked, but it's something that, okay, I'm accepting the deal, but I'm not getting everything that I want. It's satisfactory, but it's not completely exactly what I want. Another term is optimizing. It's the act of making the deal as ideal as possible for all parties by maximizing desired outcomes and minimizing the undesirable ones. So part of that, as opposed to satisficing, is figuring out what is the best deal for everyone. And so optimizing would be, okay, I'm not getting the color car I want, and I'm getting $200 off. And so you're like, all right, I'll take the car, but you got to throw in a year's worth of oil changes for me, right? So the other person gets rid of the orange car that nobody wants, but you also get, free oil changes for a year. So it's about not just accepting, what you don't want as the ideal situation, but figuring out how you can both win. Okay, so there's two ways to look at that. Another ineffective negotiation is self-reinforcement, fear of change and experimentation. And so there's a classic example of Wilt Chamberlain, and I have this great interview if I can find it. And I would suggest not listening to it right now. But in this podcast, they talk about Wilt Chamberlain, who was a very famous basketball player. But he talks about how for a time period in the NBA, he started to shoot underhanded at the free throw level. And his free throw shooting percentage went way up, right? So he's shooting the baskets underhanded, and this podcast talks about they said that there's shooting underhanded is more likely to be successful than shooting overhanded. And the point of this is when where are we? Sorry. And the habit of negotiation is, what you're doing or what you could do would be an effective tool or strategy to negotiate. You just don't want to do it, right? So you're either afraid of doing a certain action or you're afraid of trying something new that might lead you to better success. So for a while, Wilt Chamberlain actually shot underhanded and his free throw percentage went up, but he didn't want to do it anymore because he felt like his teammates and the crowd were laughing at him, right? And so there's other people that went through the same process, but even though scientifically it's shown that shooting underhand would be, a better percentage, everyone in the NBA still shoots overhanded because, there's this reinforcement that everybody does it. So in negotiation, oftentimes when you go onto a deal or lot, or you go into this where you'll be made to feel like you shouldn't do it because that's not the protocol. So they're actually using this against you. There's a self-reinforcement. Like I went to go get a new lease on a car not a few weeks ago, and I was going to go check out another shop, and I told him I was leaving, and the guy was like, "Oh, you're going to leave after all that work I did, right?" And he was trying to get me to feel bad about leaving when, that's his job to do it. So don't let the feeling that you have to do it a certain way dictate how you should negotiate if the end result is getting the best deal, right? So what are some myths about negotiation and negotiators? Good negotiators are born, not made. A lot of these tips and skills that we teach in this class, if you put them to use, you can learn how to become a better negotiator. So it's not just somebody who's, arrogant or, aggressive is necessarily the best negotiator. It's somebody that is skilled in doing what they're doing. Oftentimes, the best negotiators will make the other person feel like they didn't lose anything at all. So it's somebody that figures out what makes the other person happy and what the value is. And, the best negotiator might be somebody that makes somebody feel like they got the best deal, right? Experience is a good teacher. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, it doesn't necessarily make you a better negotiator. So if you're not increasing your knowledge of how to become a better negotiator or trying new things, then you could get into a habit of just doing the same deal over and over again. Good negotiators are risk takers. So oftentimes it should be a calculated result of what you're doing. A lot of the work you do as a good negotiator is finding out as much information as you can. So it takes a lot of the risk out of a deal. So you know exactly when a good deal is turning to a bad deal. Good negotiators relying on intuition. So that gut feeling says you're making a good deal, whereas really good negotiators would actually know the information of what they're dealing on and are able to walk away. Even though they want to make the deal, they just rely on the information provided rather than just the intuition. So what are some factors of negotiations? So I'm going to talk for a few more minutes, and then I think we have a activity coming up in just a minute. So let me present for a few more minutes. So factors of negotiation. The three most common factors are quality, time, and cost. So these are usually what people rank their decision on when they're making a purchase. So especially for business decisions. So it often is shown in this triangle type image here. And so I had a contractor that was doing a job on our house, like a bathroom remodel, right? And so he first brought this to my attention, like, okay, we can do quality work, we could do it fast, or we can do it cheap. I can do two of those. I just need to know which ones they are, right? And so the quality, I could do quality and get it done really, really quick, but it's not going to be the cheapest bid that you're going to get. Whereas I can do quality, and it's going to cost you, it's going to be a great deal for you, but I might have to put it in between other jobs. So it might take you a few months to get done. So he's explaining this to me, and he's trying to get out from my perspective, like, what is the most important thing that I want? Or what are the most important two things? And he'll try to deliver on that and figure out a deal that is best for both of us. And so if you understand these three, these are usually the three that you should at least have some idea of what the customer wants, and so that they can make a decision. So when I'm working on my business, the Promo Deli, when I do promotional products for somebody and somebody is saying they want a promotional product for their business, I often ask qualifying questions that determine what kind of quality promotional products do they want for their business. So we're talking about the little pens with their phone number imprinted on them, or T-shirts, or whatever it is they're ordering. So I'm like, what kind of quality? Is quality important to you? When do you need them by? And what's your budget? So if I ask these three questions, I can help get them the best product that they want for the thing that's important to them. And I know that there's a project management has a fourth concern too, and that's the fourth constraint of scope. So there's a little video down here if you're into the project management and you want to learn more. If I can get that thing out of the way. Get out of the way. I can't get this thing out. There we go. It's on the slides. In fact, I don't think I shared the slides with you anyway. So let's just make sure that I'm sharing the slides with you. They're on Blackboard, but here are the slides. There you go. Okay, some other factors to think about are multiple phases or partners. Many negotiations have more than two parties. Multi-phase negotiations is, especially in business dealings, you might be buying another business. So you might be buying the assets, and you're figuring out what to do with investors, figuring out what you're doing with the partners, right? So it might have to go through multiple phases of negotiations. Often it requires the trust to move on to the next phase, because once you get into it, you have to get to the end. Otherwise, everything, could be confusing or, take a lot of time. So multi-phase negotiations often involve a lot of trust, which require both parties to be releasing a certain amount of information as it moves along. Multi-party negotiations means more than two parties are involved. So it might be three different businesses. So you might be talking about a business, its supplier, and a third party, right? So you might be dealing with 3 or more parties. You can also think about negotiations for politics. So like the current healthcare bill that's going on right now, right? How many different important factors there are to consider and partners. Okay. Another thing to consider are the positions. The initial offer demand is where you start the negotiation. The target point is where you'd like to end up in the negotiation. The reservation price is as far as you're willing to go to reach an agreement. Your BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which influences your reservation price, and your ZOPA, which is your zone of potential agreement. I'm going way too fast on this for you, so I'll explain these in a little bit more detail. So I just shared out the slides, the document for that, so you have all the slides. Let's see. Oh, I see what you're saying. You don't see me. You don't see the slides. So thank you. I get what you're saying now. Thank you for letting me know. Someone sent me a private message saying, hey, I can't see the slide. All right, so here's assignment number 3. And I decided to turn this into a negotiations assignment. Let me put this up on the screen. So you'll kind of have what we're talking about. Let me get the screen up here. So your assignment for next week is to consider a negotiation. So you're not necessarily required to enter a negotiation, but I encourage you to. What I want you to do is prepare for a negotiation. Okay, so you could just consider if you're looking to buy a car, or if you're thinking about buying a business or something. You don't actually have to go out and buy that car or do the business deal. But in the process, I want you to prepare. So a lot of this, what we're talking about, these factors that you should consider. You're looking at yourself, your own party, and I say me or we. So if you're dealing with your husband and wife and you're working together, it would be we, right? So there's one side, and then there's the other party. So if you're buying a car, that would be the car dealer, okay? So you're looking at your party and the other party, and you're considering the different factors, and you should be noting all these things so you're you're gathering as much information as possible in order to create a negotiated deal. I'll go over this all with you in a little bit more detail, all these factors, so you understand a little bit better. If you get to this point, if you actually conclude the negotiation over the week, I'd love to hear what you think about it. And answer the following reflective questions. They just ask you how the negotiated went. Part of that process right here is, let me know if you can't see this. Can or can't. But there's a graphic here that we'll talk about at the end. Part of the process of negotiation, especially for businesses that do lots of negotiations all the time. So if you're doing similar negotiations, it'll be going through this ongoing cycle, right? Of pre-negotiations, preparation, you actually having the negotiation, and it's either going to go to it's either going to go to an agreement or non-agreement, and then you're going to have this post-mortem learning process where you'll evaluate what's going on. And so in this process, let's say you have a negotiation, we're talking about pre-negotiations right now, right? You're learning about what the factors are, you're understanding everything. You'll prepare, which is this, is your preparations. Figuring out what the deal is. You can actually go into the car dealership and negotiate. If you reach an agreement, you'll go back, and especially a week or two later, you might feel that you got a great deal or you could have done something better. And what you do is you capture that experience and you're like, man, I should take some notes so I remember next time I go back to deal with a car dealership, I'll negotiate better. And so you go back to this process, and the next time you negotiate, hopefully you'll become a better negotiator. So I want you to get this on this cycle of going into a negotiation. Part of the process is preparing, and the other part is evaluating afterwards. So this activity walks you through it. So even if you don't get to the negotiation that you want to this week, that's fine. The assignment is just to do this first part, the preparing. And if you go and you do the deal, a month from now or 2 months from now, go back to this assignment, answer these questions, and then maybe make a different checklist or edit this how you want to. Okay. So let's do this activity, and I'll express this, and then I need 2 volunteers. One will be the buyer and one will be the seller of a used 2004 Subaru Impreza WRX. So somebody wants to volunteer to buy, someone wants to sell. I'll walk you through some information so you can so they'll have to go through the negotiations. So we'll do the negotiations in about 5 or 10 minutes. Actually, we'll do it after break. I will not be recording that process, but I'd like to have a volunteer. One will act as the buyer and one will have the seller. Okay, so I'm here, will be the seller. And Nancy will be the buyer. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll send you both some information in about 5 minutes. I'll send you some information on both. Actually, I'll send it to you right now. Okay. So here's the seller fact. So I'm only sending this to the seller. So I trust that you will, as the buyer and seller, will not look at these on the will not be looking at this because you can find it on the slides. But so only look. I just sent you privately a link. There's some information that the seller knows and the information that the buyer knows. And what we'll have you do after our break is we'll have you negotiate the deal and see if you can come to a conclusion of what the price is. And then we'll have everybody watch and comment and see how they did. Okay? But before we get to that, I want to go through a little bit more information. Okay. And then we'll take a little break. So I went over very quickly some of the factors to think about during the negotiation. And we'll be using this example of this used car. Someone's selling it, which is Amir. And someone's buying it, which is Nancy. So this is a 2004 Subaru Impreza WRX. I give you some of the specs on it so you can see what's going on. The mileage is about 75,000 miles. So even though it's used, it's got pretty low miles for how old it is. So that's the deal. So let me explain some of these positions. So you've got 2 parties here. You've got the buyer and seller of this car. You've got the buyer, who is Nancy. There she is right there. Photo may not be accurate. You've got the seller over here, Amir. And there are 2 different interests, right? And the car's value is somewhere in this range. You can probably tell it's between $2,000 and $10,000. All right? And so obviously the seller's interest is to do what? Sell it for as much money as possible. The buyer's interest is to buy it for as low as possible, all right? The seller's initial offer, when Nancy walks into the lot and sees it, it's going to be high, right, on the high end. So the seller is going to make an initial offer, okay? And the seller is going to know their resistance point. So they're saying to themselves, okay, I want to not, get less than $6,000, let's say, for it. All right. So they know ahead of time when they're going to walk away. A BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Now, both parties have a BATNA, whether you realize it or not. And the point is, when you go into negotiation, you need to know what your BATNA is. All right? And so for each party, they'll have their own BATNA. So for the buyer, Nancy, she'll walk in and say, like, okay, what's my alternative to not buying this car? And you know this ahead of time. And the example would be, all right, if I don't want to buy this car, I found another, Subaru that I like that's for sale. Or I could keep driving my current car, or I could walk to work instead, or I can take Uber. So having a list of alternatives to not doing this deal is really important, because you go and you look at your sheet right here, and if you list all the reasons why you should not buy this car, right? If you list them all down here on your worksheet, then you'll have something to remember right in front of you, like, okay, what happens if I don't do this deal? And it's a good reminder to have that you can walk away, because being able to walk away is a powerful tool. The buyer's initial request, there will be somewhere on the low point, right? The seller's resistance point, right? Oh, I'm sorry. I screwed this up. I see what I did now. In the upper part is the buyer's initial request and buyer's resistance point. So I screwed up on that. The buyer's resistance point is they don't want to spend more than around $6,000. Okay? Whereas the seller's resistance point is they don't want to sell it for less than $4,000. So if they're, putting it up for sale for $8,000, there's this wiggle room between the seller's initial offer and the seller's resistance point. Okay? I'm sorry to confuse you on that. So the yellow part is just the buyer. Her initial request is going to be low, but she'll pay up to $6,000. All right? So hopefully the idea is that in between the seller's resistance point and buyer's resistance point, there's some amount of room that you can negotiate, right? If this was reversed, if the buyer didn't want to spend more than $4,000 and the seller didn't want to sell it for less than $6,000, there's no room for you to meet in the middle, right? So ideally in this situation, there's between the two resistance points, there's room to negotiate, okay? So for the seller's BATNA, what do they have as a BATNA, right? They could always just sell the car to another buyer, or they could keep it, right? Or they could use it for whatever they want, a third car or something. So the seller has a BATNA as well. So this area in between the two resistance point, that's where you can negotiate and actually get a deal that would be done. So this is what's called the ZOPA, or Zone of Potential Agreement. And if you actually have a ZOPA, you can move forward. Sometimes you might not realize that you're too far away. So this information is not known to you. So the information that I gave to Nancy and I gave to Amir is I gave the buyer and seller's background information of what they're doing. Okay. In here, you're going to have the buyer's target point, and you're going to have the seller's target point. So yeah, the seller made the initial offer of $8,000, but they like to get like $5,500 for it or something like that. But they will not take less than $4,000. The buyer's initial request, yeah, they want to get it for as cheap as possible, but they're not going to pay more than $6,000 for it. So they'd like to get it for $4,500 or something. So we'll see how they do in the negotiations. Okay, so given both of the I'm going to stop the recording here.